At the end of December last year, I made a meme video where I pretended to be a developer for a day, and I talked about the problems that the different healing specializations had as I saw them, and then what potential changes I would make if I was a developer to fix those problems. Now, looking back in hindsight, most of my suggestions are trash. Unfortunately, there's no way of getting around that, but I did pick two winners. This was in patch 10.0.5. We knew 10.0.7 was coming, but we hadn't had any patch notes or any information or detail provided by Blizzard as to what would be in 10.0.7. And I think I had just maybe come out of a bad, not good offensive on my Resto Shaman, probably wiped to the Tempest boss, and in typical fashion for me, I blamed the spec rather than the player. So I talked about two problems I felt that Resto Shamans had at the time. The first was a lack of spread group-wide healing. I felt like Resto Shaman stacked healing was quite good. If you could get your whole team in your healing rain and press all your buttons, Resto Shaman felt great. But as soon as your group had to be spread out, especially around a boss like Tempest and people were collecting orbs and things like that, I felt like my buttons to handle group-wide damage when my group was spread out were very, very limited. I effectively had Ascendance and Healing Tide Totem, and then I would effectively just spam Riptide and Healing Surge and try and triage heal to keep people alive. So to fix that problem, one of the suggestions I made was that the Tidebringer talent, the PvP talent, you're going to stack every 8 seconds, increases the jump distance, and reduces the cast time on Chain Heal. I suggested that that should be changed from a PvP talent to the spec tree. And I thought that that would fix the issue I had with spread healing. If I could rely on a pretty juicy Chain Heal every 8 seconds or 10 seconds or something, and it would jump far enough between targets that my group could be loosely spread and I could still heal them all, I thought that would be great. The other suggestion was that I felt like Resto Shaman lacked an external. I didn't think Resto Shamans needed their external to be a 1 or 2 minute cooldown with a 30 or 40% damage reduction like every other healer, but I did feel like they needed something, so my suggestion was that a permanent DR should be added to Earthshield. Almost exactly 1 month after I posted my video, we got the first set of blue patch notes, the blue post for 10.0.7, and in it was quite a lot of changes for Resto Shaman, which were all fantastic. It reduced a lot of the bloat of their talent trees, but then there was also a line that read that the Tidebringer PvP talent had been moved to the spec tree. A week or so later, we had another round of updates and another blue post, which included a line that talked about adding functionality to the Earthshield 2-point talent that would give Earthshield a permanent DR. Now, I don't think that my video influenced Blizzard development or design or anything like that, but I got somewhat lucky in that I managed to predict those two changes. And that's what this video is going to be. But instead of for 10.0.7, it's for 10.1.7. I won't be going over every healer. This video is only going to be for Mistweaver and Discipline Priest changes. I'm going to talk about some of the problems that the specs have in Mythic Plus as I see them, and what potential changes or improvements to their toolkit that I think they need. I'm going to start with Mistweaver. It's the spec that I think requires the most work. It has the most problems in my opinion, but after making notes and spending a couple of weeks playing Mistweaver and keys and like really trying to nail down some specific changes, this has been really quite hard for me. I could probably talk for an hour about all of the different problems I have with the spec, but coming up with elegant solutions is difficult. The first overall conclusion I have for Mistweaver is that if healing requirements in a dungeon fall within what my toolkit has, Mistweaver feels fantastic. Feels like honestly one of the best healers and most enjoyable healers I've played in a long time. If damage patterns fall into my healing profile, if that makes sense. Now, I'll give you a couple examples. Shaylin's Gift is incredibly powerful. I'm pretty sure every single Mistweaver at the moment in Mythic Plus specs for it, because this button in a lot of keys will single-handedly take care of all of your group-wide healing needs. Everyone takes the talent in keys at least that gives you a stack of Shaylin's Gift every 4 seconds, and everyone takes the Legacy of Wisdom talent that makes Shaylin's Gift heal 5 targets at once, so your whole party. Shaylin's Gift becomes an incredibly good heal. There are many occasions where even 2 or 3, maybe 4 stacks of Shaylin's Gift, which doesn't take that long to accumulate, can just completely handle a whole boss mechanic or a Mythic Plus mechanic by itself. And like I said, if the healing requirements or the group-wide healing requirements can be completely handled by Shaylin's Gift, then Mistweaver feels fantastic. And it's a similar issue for, I would say, pretty much everything else for Mistweaver. If the healing that I have to do while moving can be handled with just Vivify procs, then the spec feels great. If my spot healing or single target healing can just be handled by, again, Vivify, then that feels great. If a lot of my maintenance healing can be handled by just renewing mist spreading around and pressing a Vivify here and there, or just fist weaving with Ancient Teachings and Feline Stomp, then again, the spec feels great. If my cooldown healing can be handled with just Shiji or Yulon, maybe a Revival, then I'm having a good time playing Mistweaver. The issues I have with the spec all arise when damage patterns fall outside of what my healing profile is capable of. If I can top the group with a Shaylin's Gift and then still have to heal the group afterwards for, let's say, sustained damage, or maybe there's 2 big group-wide burst healing events that need to happen in 10 seconds or something, then I run into serious problems. If pressing Vivify with my instant cast Vivify proc every 10 seconds isn't enough to cover the healing I have to do while I need to move, then I run into problems again. I don't have any specific changes for this to fix these problems. All I can really say is that group-wide healing can't be entirely dependent on Shaylin's Gift. Spot healing can't live or die on the back of Vivify. My movement healing needs to be better than just a Vivify proc every 10 seconds, or maybe a Revival or a TFT cooldown with Enveloping Mists usage. I need other buttons to press to handle those kind of scenarios. It can't just come down to one button or one mechanic or one talent solving the problem. Now, I would say those are the problems that the spec has when I'm playing what I guess would be considered the meta build. And that is something that looks a little bit like this. Now, I would say that this build is built to fistweave. It is built to handle AoE or group-wide healing with Shaylin's Gift. And then when either of those 2 situations aren't enough, it's built to get throughput from Shiji, so your Celestial cooldown. And then there's a couple of extra, I guess, smaller things in here, like you still want to be using your Vivify and your Enveloping Mists and stuff when you need them. But generally, that's how I've been playing it. I fistweave a lot, and then I handle a lot of AoE mechanics with Shaylin's Gift. And then when that isn't enough, or I need to do different healing profiles or something, I'm basically relying on Celestial or Revival, maybe a TFT in some way. And when those tools aren't enough, the spec feels very lacking to me. Now, there are other ways to play Mistweaver. I've also been playing around quite a bit with a build that looks like this. I might change a couple of points here and there, like getting out of Peaceful Mending to take Clouded Focus, and maybe dropping Mystic Peaks to take Secret Infusion and Invoker's Delight. But this is a build that is obviously built a different way for a different sort of healing profile. It's much more caster oriented, it doesn't fistweave, it still relies heavily on Shaylin's Gift, but it also gets a lot of value out of TFT and Yulon. But I have found that any build I try to make that doesn't take fistweaving feels like it does significantly less damage. And that is because, at least in my estimation, it is because damage for fistweavers or mistweavers in keys comes down to pressing spinning crank kick like 200 or 300 times in a key. And playing any build where you're not doing that means that your damage, or at least my damage, feels very lacking. A build like this also feels quite constrained to hard-casted, standing still kind of healing. A lot of these issues are difficult to talk about though, because obviously what I'm saying is only one side of the discussion, and there are many different ways to build a Fistweaver. So I could talk about how playing Mistweaver feels like I'm always stuck hard-casting and spending a lot of mana, and then someone else will play a Mistweaver, but they'll spec for fistweaving and say, I don't really know what you're talking about because I just press Rising Sun Kick and Spinning Crane Kick and top my team all the time. And then someone else will play a build that has some caster focus and some fistweaver focus but doesn't take Shaylin's Gift, and then they might be complaining about AoE healing, but I don't think that's a problem because I take this talent. So it's difficult to nail down. The overall conclusion I have from playing a few different variations and specializations is that the Mistweaver toolkit doesn't feel flexible enough. I believe that Mistweaver needs more options for AoE healing than just Shaylun's Gift. I believe that Mistweaver needs better spot healing than just Vivify or being stuck in place channeling Soothing with an Enveloping with Vivify and having to combo those 3 abilities together and spend 20,000 mana just to keep one person's triage healed or spot healed enough. There are too many limitations. And again with damage. Damage is a big factor for me for Mistweaver because I dislike the current playstyle of Mistweavers just pressing the same global 200-300 times in a key. It's very boring. I know some people really like that gameplay. I would like to see it expanded a little bit. I would also like to see some dead abilities like Crackling Jade Lightning be turned into useful abilities. I also think that a lot of our other cooldown based abilities like Chi Wave or Chi Burst, Zen Pulse for example, even Touch of Death, Summon White Tiger Statue. These are all buttons that we have, but they're all balanced so poorly that most of the time they aren't worth pressing. I mean, obviously Touch of Death and your White Tiger Statue is worth pressing, but something like Zen Pulse, any globals you spend trying to buff it up with its talents means that you're almost always better off just spamming Spinning Crank Kick or fishing for RSK resets, which feels pretty bad. I would like to see a lot of these buttons turned into impactful abilities that are worth pressing. When I drop a White Tiger Statue on a 2-minute cooldown, it should do significant amounts of damage. If I'm going to talent for Chi Burst and it has a 30-second cooldown, it needs to do more damage than a Spinning Crank Kick that has no cooldown. What Mistweaver is getting in 10.1.7 though is a rework to Mana Tea. So at the moment on live, Mana Tea is just a 1.5 minute cooldown, reduces your mana cost by 50% for 10 seconds. What's happening in 10.1.7 is Mana Tea is being moved up on the talent tree, and it is becoming a mechanic that instead grants a stack of Mana Tea every 25,000 mana you spend. You have a chance equal to your critical strike chance to gain 1 extra stack whenever you do gain a stack, and then you can channel those stacks at a time of your choosing to gain 3,000 mana back every half a second, so 6,000 a second. You can then, if you wish, talent into improving your Mana Tea by making it channel faster and grant more mana, or make your other abilities provide more stacks. I remember making a different video back in Season 1. I complained about Mistweaver mana because I did a Shadow Moon Burial Grounds key. For those of you who don't know, that was a dungeon in Season 1 that didn't really require very much healing. And especially if you had a clean group, you were basically there as a healer to just do damage. And I complained that I burnt through an entire mana bar between the second and third bosses by pressing effectively nothing except Spinning Crank Kick and Rising Sun Kick. I disliked the fact that I could go by just doing damage, and I wasn't spec'd for Ancient Teachings, which means I wasn't healing my team by doing damage. I was just doing damage, and I went and I really disliked that. I didn't like the idea that I'm a healer, I'm not even healing, and I'm still going, this is terrible. Now what 10.1.7 is doing for Mana Tea, or Mistweaver mana in general, is by fixing those sorts of issues. Mistweavers will now be able to spend mana on doing damage, and then they will still be able to manage that mana with Mana Tea, even if they're not healing. But they will also be able to do things like save up stacks and go into a boss fight with full mana and Mana Tea stacks, so that they have even more mana to play with on a boss that maybe they might feel they need it. And that extra control and overall extra mana that the Mana Tea change is going to bring in 10.1.7 is, I think, an excellent solution to a couple of problems that Mistweavers currently have. Even now, if you take away Set Bonus and Rashok's Trinket, Mistweaver almost becomes a non-functioning spec because it has such intense mana issues. If you take away those two borrowed power mechanics, the same thing would happen in Season 2 that happened in Season 1, in that you could just do damage and go in a key. Now that isn't very good balance or design, and that is something that's being fixed in 10.1.7, which I think is great. What I would like to see is a similar modernization or similar fixes to certain aspects of a Mistweaver's toolkit in 10.1.7, and that is going to be things like making Mistweavers less reliant on Shaylun's Gift to do group healing, making them less reliant on Fist Weaving with Feline Stomp to do damage, making them less reliant on TFT usage or revival usage or a Vivify proc every 10 seconds to cover their mobility healing, giving them additional ways to cover their spot healing that isn't just standing still to channel Soothing Mist into an Enveloping Mist into a Vivify, or hoping that just one Vivify is going to be enough healing. I would also like to see a lot of our so-called dead talents just numerically brought up so that they're worth pressing. Zen Pulse, especially with a talent option that buffs Zen Pulse, should be significant damage. It should be worth pressing. Same thing with Chi Burst. I would really like to see Chi Burst do more damage than a Spinning Crane Kick if it's got a 30-second cooldown. I would really like to see White Tiger for a 2-minute cooldown and a capstone talent. I would like to see it do actual meaningful damage. If I'm going to drop White Tiger on the big Bloodlust pool with 30 mobs in it in a dungeon, it should slap. It should do real damage. At the moment, it doesn't. And that brings me to the main issue I have with the Monk class tree in general, is that these 3 capstones are absolutely horrible. Summon Black Ox statue, for some reason, it does almost nothing, or maybe it's completely bugged. When I tested this, I went into a dungeon, I dropped Black Ox statue just by myself, just a Mythic 0, and the statue couldn't keep aggro of mobs hitting me through my healing aggro. Like, just me healing myself pulled aggro off the statue. That's how bad it is. Same thing with White Tiger statue. It's so meaningless on overall damage at the moment that I can't tell the difference between a Mistweaver that's talented for their capstone for damage or not, because it doesn't do damage. Jade Serpent statue is probably the best of the 3, but still pretty bad. I would really like to see this go back to its former functionality where the statue will cast Soothing Mist even if I'm not. It will just automatically constantly heal people. Particularly for capstone talents, these need to be meaningful choices. If I've spec'd into Black Ox statue as a healer, this should be some kind of group survival cooldown, or, oh, the tank's dead, I can drop my Black Ox statue to buy us a couple of seconds while they get battle rezzed up. Same thing with Jade Serpent statue. This should do some actual healing and not effectively require me to stop doing damage or using half of my toolkit to get any value out of the statue itself. And yeah, White Tiger just needs to do damage. It needs to do damage like it did back in beta. I saw Blue Squared on the forums made a fantastic suggestion asking for Song of Shi-Ji to not put the monk that casts it in combat when they incapacitate a group of mobs. That would be fantastic. That would be great. The same thing should probably also happen for Paralysis. At the moment, I think there's a weird kind of interaction where if you stand at absolutely max range and press Paralysis, you won't be put in combat, but if you're 1 yard closer, you will. So I would like to see the same thing happen for Paralysis. I should be able to Paralysis a mob I'm running past without getting into combat with it. There are a lot of minor suggestions here. I really just think the spec itself needs a little bit of love from Blizzard. After playing Evoker and noticing the small things that the specs that Blizzard are obviously putting time into have, and then playing a monk and realizing that none of those things happen, is kind of disheartening. Playing Augmentation or even Preservation and being able to press hover to do all of your mobile healing feels like cheating. If you then go and play a Mistweaver and you have to run somewhere, or there's a mechanic that forces you to move and you I guess I just don't do any healing right now. Even small things, like if you, well, first of all, you can press hover while casting. If you are casting a spell and hover runs out while the spell is casting, you can keep your movement functionality until the cast ends. Those sorts of small quality of life, or I guess you could say power creep, but those kind of small things that make you feel like the ability you pressed worked is in many ways what I feel like Mistweaver is lacking. If you hard cast a Vivify and you gain your 10-second instant cast Vivify proc while casting, you will consume the proc and not make Vivify instant cast. So when I say that Mistweaver needs a little bit of love in a lot of ways, that's kind of what I'm talking about. How is it that I can cast a spell with 0.1 seconds left on hover and then continue moving while my spell continues casting, but then if I go and play a Mistweaver, I can hard cast 1.4 out of 1.5 seconds of a Vivify, and if I gain my Vivify instant cast proc at the very end, or at any time during the Vivify cast, It just eats the proc and I gain nothing. If I channel Soothing Mist with Clouded Focus, I don't gain the mana reduction until the second cast, but I gain the increased healing on the first cast. As far as the one major change I would like to see, not necessarily in 10.1.7, but a change in the future that I would really like to see is with regards to Vivify. I think that Blizzard were on the right track with Vivify making it instant cast back in beta. I would like to see that functionality returned. Now, it created a couple of problems in beta which caused Blizzard to revert that change. That was mainly that Mistweaver became a spec that just pressed Vivify into every healing profile. It didn't really require much of the rest of its toolkit. It just ran around spamming Vivify pretty much at all times, and it did really well. What I would like to see happen though is for Vivify to effectively become Uplift. I would like Vivify to be instant cast, but I would like it to not have a direct heal component. I would like for it only to proc the cleave heal on your Renewing Mist targets and have no mastery proc or direct heal proc at all. And then I would like functionality added to Soothing Mist, such that when I'm channeling Soothing Mist and press Vivify, I get the mastery proc, I get the direct heal. I think that solves, or would solve, a lot of issues for Mistweaver. I think it would significantly bolster its group healing or AoE healing. I think it would also add the ability to make the Vivify direct heal even stronger to bolster Mistweaver's spot healing. I think something else could then be done with Vivacious Vivification to make that a little bit more interesting. And I think it would overall, it would do a good job of still making the spec feel more fluid and more flexible. Being able to heal while running into and out of melee range or just on the move in general felt fantastic in beta. It solved so many issues I had with the spec, and taking it away, at least in my opinion, it left quite a big gap, or like a hole in the specialization. Mistweaver is a spec that is supposed to kind of run or juggle itself inside and outside of melee range. It's supposed to be quite a mobile healer, and at the moment those things just aren't true. You want to be in melee range pretty much all the time when you're fist weaving, and never if you're not fist weaving. Unfortunately, you have no good way of doing damage other than being in melee range, which creates a whole nother host of issues. Finally, for Mistweaver, this goes outside the scope of the video a little bit because this isn't a 10.1.7 thing, but mastery for Mistweavers really needs some attention. It has to be a stat that is at least in some way useful. It needs to be incorporated well into the specialization. At the moment, it isn't. For the past, I don't even know how many years, mastery is just the stat that everyone avoids all the time. It's just bad, permanently. It doesn't do anything for damage. It really doesn't do much for actual healing. It's a stat that I have tried to build around quite a few times. Even in Season 1, I think I made a video, especially back when Shaylin's Gift only hit 3 targets, but it procced Mastery on all 3 targets. I was talking about how there might be some kind of fun Mastery stacking build. I wish that was the case. The fundamental problem Mistweaver Mastery has is that it's a stat that only ever heals 1 target at a time. And that is just, it isn't compatible with modern healing in dungeons in 2023. I don't really have any other good way of saying that. Even if Mastery did 1 billion healing, it probably still would be bad because there are too many times where healing 1 person isn't enough. Even if you top their health bar on every single global, it would still be questionable. So something has to be done to fix the mastery problem for Mistweavers. Like I said, I think the spec itself has quite a lot of issues. It is difficult though, because like I said at the beginning as well, when the healing requirements of a dungeon or a boss fight fall within the range of what I have available to me as a Mistweaver, the spec feels great. So even though I've spent 20 minutes complaining about it, it still is a fun spec. Up next is Discipline Priest. This is the spec that surprised me a lot, actually, like a lot. I played Mistweaver for a couple of weeks. I did, I don't know, a few dozen keys, and I was like, you know, this is pretty good, right? Mistweaver feels fantastic in some dungeons. If I can handle all my group healing with Shaylin's Gift and just kind of fist weave my way through all the rest of it, Mistweaver feels sick, really fun. And then I picked up Discipline Priest. And this was just after the Rhapsody change that buffed it by 400%, by the way. This might be the most heavily buffed ability in WoW's history, maybe at least in recent memory. It used to be that every 2 seconds, the damage of your next Holy Nova increased by 10%, I believe, which was pretty terrible. No one took it. And then it got changed so that every 1 second, your Holy Nova damage and healing is increased by 20%, which means after 20 seconds, your Holy Nova does 500% healing and damage, basically. Quite the game changer. At the same time, I believe we got Essence Devourer, which I've been playing with and enjoying quite a lot. I mean, I know it's a capstone, so it should be quite good, but any talent on the class tree that can give you 5% of your healing overall is, in my opinion, worth taking. And then at the same time, I believe we got the Benevolence change, or maybe this was the patch beforehand. So instead of having to take Power Word Life, you can now take Benevolence to increase your healing by 3%. Now, I have played quite a few different variations of Disc in the past week or two. I've played some Schism builds, some extended Shadow Covenant builds, I've played some Exaltation builds, I have played Harsh Discipline and Expiation builds with Twilight Equilibrium, I've played the Mindbender build that a lot of people call the Squid build, I've played the, I guess what used to be called the Dark Disc, I've played around having Mindbender with the Void Summoner branch along with Expiation and Harsh Discipline. I've also played it with the Power Word Shield Aegis of Wrath nodes. I've done a lot. And honestly, I have enjoyed all of it. It's been, like I said, quite surprising. For Mythic Plus in particular, especially because I'm only pugging, I'm not in an organized group. If I was always playing with, let's say, a Guardian Druid that doesn't require healing, and I was always playing with DPS that used health pots and health stones and pushed to defensive and stuff so that I didn't have to have the strongest spot healing available, I probably wouldn't play Aegis of Wrath. I might even drop Divine Aegis and Train of Thought and go into a more damage heavy Harsh Discipline Expiation build. But in pugs, this is what I've come to enjoy the most. Damage, especially with Holy Nova after Rhapsody, has felt excellent. I would even say comparable with Holy Paladin at the moment. I've been able to do some 40 to 50k overalls in a lot of dungeons, and then even more than that in Freehold and Brackenhide Hollow. The damage is there, and it isn't spammy, which is something that I personally quite like. I have to combo quite a lot of abilities together. I'm obviously applying my Purge the Wickeds, I'm spreading them with my Penance on cooldown, I'm using my Holy Nova when Rhapsody charges are over 15, I'm using Divine Star or Halo effectively on cooldown, I'm also pressing Mindbender and using my Shadow Covenant with my Mind Blast charges to get my Inescapable Torment procs with Shadow Word Death. There's a lot going on, and that is what feels so good about Discipline Priest. I'm combining half a dozen abilities together while healing, half a dozen abilities together with damage, and I'm getting what I would say feels like appropriately rewarded for that kind of complexity. This might not be for everyone because it is a little bit like playing the piano. I'm pressing quite a few buttons, and it took me a little bit of experimentation to get my keybinds down so that I can, rotate through a dozen, 15 abilities constantly without getting RSI or anything. But like I said, the spec feels excellent. I'm not even that geared. Most of my keys were done last week at like 432 or 433. I've gotten quite a few upgrades this week. I have also been going very crit heavy, and I know this is anathema for Discipline Priests everywhere, and I'm doing it wrong, but I've been avoiding haste like the plague. I want to get rid of all of my haste and all of my mastery, and I'm going for purely crit verse. That is a bit of an experiment on my part. I might end up changing a lot of my crafted gear back to haste once I'm fully geared and I can play around with it and see how it feels. But the two issues I've had with stacking haste for the past few years now, especially since the Power Word Radiance buff, has been that haste doesn't increase the healing of my most powerful abilities. So as an example, especially after the Rhapsody change where you get a lot of your Holy Nova damage from a stacking buff that isn't increased by haste, well, stacking haste does nothing to increase my Holy Nova damage. Stacking haste does nothing to increase my Power Word Radiance healing. It does nothing to increase the damage of my Penance or healing of my Penance. What it allows me to do is to press more buttons after those abilities, or quicker after those abilities. But I have been stacking versatility so that for the sake of this argument, I guess, let's say that I had 4,000 rating in haste instead of versatility, I would be pressing a power word radiance that's 20% weaker than the one I have right now. Now I would press it faster, I guess, and be able to press another button after it, but the healing of the ability itself is not increased by haste. So I've been playing around crit bursts and a talent build that looks like this. And like I said, it's been very enjoyable, very, very fun. What I also like is there are a lot of options, even in small ways. I could drop Shield Discipline to take Schism. I could drop a couple of nodes elsewhere to take Embrace the Shadow to increase my Shadow Covenant duration. I could drop the whole Mindbender branch and play with Expiation and Twilight Equilibrium or Harsh Discipline instead. It feels like I have a lot of choices as to how I build my kit, so to speak, and that is something I found very enjoyable. I would even go out on a bit of a limb here and say that Discipline is probably the second best healer in keys at the moment. Its healing throughput feels excellent. Its damage is top tier. I think, like I said, especially counting PI, I think its competitive damage with Holy Paladin, which is really kind of saying something right now. It's probably double the damage of a lot of other healers. It has excellent cooldowns. I don't have any issues with mobile healing, spot healing, group healing, like anything. I feel like I have the buttons for all of it. It's just a matter of how well I can play to press the right button at the right time. And that's what I think a lot of healing specs should be. The only two criticisms I have, or the issues I have with Discipline at the moment, is that the spec feels a little bit bloated. Similarly to how I think Blizzard were on the right track with making Vivify instant cast in early beta, I think Blizzard were also on the right track when they said that Discipline suffered from a little bit of button bloat. As you might notice from this tree, I actually avoid quite a few buttons or extra buttons. I don't take Prayer of Mending. I don't take the extra Shadow Word Death Charge. I don't take Mind Games. I don't take Power Word Life. I don't take Schism. I don't even take Expiation because it just forces me to press Purge the Wicked even more often than I already do. I avoid a lot of talent options that give me more buttons to press. And I instead pick the talents that make the buttons I do rely on as strong as possible. I think most of the button bloat actually comes from damaging abilities. Having to apply and spread Purge the Wicked, you're basically always pressing Penance on cooldown every 9 seconds. You want to use your Mind Blast charges and Shadow Word Death and Shadow Word Covenant and Holy Nova when it's particularly on high stacks. And if you talent for it, you want to be pressing Schism. And if you talent for it with Expiation, every time you press Mind Blast, you're losing Purge the Wicked uptime. So you're pressing that even more often again. And then if you're playing Twilight Equilibrium, especially on your higher impact and a larger button presses, you're trying to alternate those between light and dark, and then through all of that, you're also pressing Power Word Shield on cooldown and Smite as often as you can as well to build up Harsh Discipline stats if you're playing that. There's just a lot happening. So what I would like for Discipline is for a little bit of streamlining, particularly on damaging abilities. I don't exactly know how that happens because a lot of these buttons, like I said at the start of this section, I really like that there's a lot of things to juggle. I think there's just a little bit too much to juggle. Smite is probably a big offender here with Harsh Discipline. The one change I would really like to see, probably it would be enough actually as well, is for Harsh Discipline to be removed. I would prefer Penance to just be strong all the time and not have to rely on pressing Mind Blast or Solace or Smite 4 times between every Penance or every second Penance. If Harsh Discipline went away and Penance was just made twice as strong as it currently is, I think Disc would be almost perfect. I also thought I would really dislike the kind of move towards Discipline becoming more of a melee or like closer range healer, because of Holy Nova, Divine Star, Fear, things like that, like your stops and a lot of your AoE damage is very short range. I thought I would dislike that, but I actually don't. I think it's fine. The range on Holy Nova is larger than the graphic makes it appear. Divine Star, you get used to the range on that pretty quickly and how far away you can be. So yeah, I thought that would bother me, but it hasn't. The only other issue I have with Discipline is a lack of a kick. This is a pretty big one for me, actually. I think it is straight up unacceptable that 34 out of the 36 specializations, or maybe it's 37 now in the game, have a kick and 2 don't. I don't even care if it's a minute long cooldown. I don't care if it's not the shadow silence, because that might be a little bit too strong for PvP or something. None of that really bothers me. Even only having one stop because knock was taken away, or knockback was taken away. Even only having one stop in Psychic Scream, I can understand that as a design decision, because priests bring a lot of other tools. We bring Mind Soothe, we bring PI, we bring Fort, we bring Master Spell. I can understand not having multiple stops like every other spec has, or knockbacks and vortexes and all that kind of stuff. I can understand not having a lot of stops to make up for that. But not having a kick, I don't agree with. I was pugging a lot of disc keys, and this is certainly more of an issue in lower keys than higher keys. I did a couple of Vortex Pinnacles last week, but it was fortified. And I'll play some footage of it. I was stupid enough to join a group and start a key with a warrior and a hunter and me on a discipline priest on Afflicted week. And going into those first few trash packs, or even the first boss, without a kick, I can't stop the cyclones, I can't stop the wind blasts, I can't kick the first boss in rotation with the rest of the group. There are so many things I just can't do. In a lot of low keys, especially when kicks get overlapped, there's no communication. In many cases, all you're really trying to do isn't to stop every single cast, it's just to stop the dangerous ones, like on the first few trash packs in Vortex Pinnacle. I'm looking to stop the cyclone casts, not necessarily all the wind blasts. But not having a kick just means I couldn't participate in any of those mechanics. It became less of an issue. I started getting into 21, 22, 23 keys, and it became much less of a problem because the kicks were handled much more expertly by the rest of the group. But it still feels bad to have so many dungeon mechanics really just being about stopping things from happening, and me having no ways to contribute to that. So that's the big one. That's the design decision that I can't agree with Blizzard on. I think it's a huge gap in the Healing Priest toolkit. I think they need an interrupt. Like I said, I don't care if it's a particularly weak one or a long cooldown one. It just needs something. The other is mobility. Feather is not enough. It sucks. I ended up, on every other healer I play, I put stamina enchant on my boots because, more health, live through more mechanics. Makes logical sense to me. On my discipline priest, I put 250 speed because 5% movement speed bonus along with feather, it still isn't enough. But there are so many mechanics in keys now, especially if I'm playing on a US server, where if I don't have feather up, I can't get out of the mechanic. There's literally no button for me to press to get out of something if I don't have feather. And that's what feels bad. I would love to see, I don't think this is a 10.1.7 change, but I would love to see going forward either the reverse life grip come back. I know Blizzard said that they didn't want to give priests the reverse life grip because every priest would take it. It's not particularly sound logic in my opinion, but I would love to see that be brought back. Or as someone way back in beta had an excellent suggestion, which was to put Door of Shadows on the tree somewhere. I would even love to see it be put on a choice node with Mind Games, so that I can, and then, I don't know, maybe even make Mind Games a little bit stronger, so that if I take the mobility, I'd lack the damage. Especially for PvP, I could see that being quite a good trade-off. For PvE, however, yeah, just feather isn't enough. Even all the way back, I believe, in Legion beta, perhaps, there was an artifact trait or something that was data mined that gave Levitate a speed bonus. I would love something like that. I actually think that would be really quite fitting for Priest, right? If you can avoid damage, you can move a little bit faster. But if you get hit, you lose the speed bonus. I think that would be fantastic. I would love to see that. Overall, I am enjoying Discipline Priest. Like, I've always been a disc enjoyer since the Legion rework, but I honestly believe it might be in the best state it's ever been in. It feels so fun and good to play in keys. It feels like if I can manage all of my damage buttons and my kind of juggle the 6 minor cooldowns or jobs I have to do to deal damage, then I get rewarded with meaningful, good damage. If I can do the same thing and combine all of my healing and atonement buttons in the right orders at the right time, I get rewarded with what feels like quite good throughput. Overall, exceptionally happy with Disc. It needs a kick and it needs something to help its mobility. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. and algorithm stuff.